Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Let's hop in. Woke up with a bit of a sniffle today, so I hope I'm not coming down with anything. It's probably just uh, the humidity and the weather changing. See, we've got a anti-spell festival, which if we get any daily quests that say play spells, you won't be able to get that done. And then there's a version update coming November 29th. Let's see. Doesn't seem like too much is changing there. And then there's just some issues. Like, it's really not worth your time looking at these. So I don't know why they bother pop this up. I guess the question I really should ask is, can I just disable that? Because I really would prefer to just disable that. Let's see. It would have to be under settings, since none of those others seem to be settings. Yeah. And there's still kind of a lackluster number of settings in this game. Yeah, and that really hasn't changed since launch. So yeah, it just seems kind of ridiculous for them to bother to do that. And if this is a anti-spell festival, then we're kind of in a good position. Let's just start by opening packs just for the fun of it, because my deck, my Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck, doesn't use spells really that much. It has like one spell, so that'd be easy enough to change and get rid of. And still, it makes a lot of sense to continuously go down the path of opening these things. I looked at the description of the new Pokemon trading card game, live, whatever it's called, that's the new one. And you can't buy packs in the multiplayer at all. You have to put in codes for buying the real world packs, which that's, at least at this point, that's something that just would not work for me. So yeah, we need to do the anti-spell festival. At some point I need to come back and try and get to platinum, just so I don't drop all the way down to silver 5 at the end of the month. We should play some loner decks, I guess. And then there is, I guess, a actual reward this time for getting to the 5,000 point, and then 11,000 points gets you packs, and then everything above 11,000 is either 2 legacy packs or a title, which doesn't matter. So the goal is to get at least to the 11,000 point. Honestly, I may not have that much trouble. I have been, as far as the accountability section, still playing Resident Evil 4. I'm right at the point where the castle gets a little crazier, as the castle section, the middle act of the game, really is the mixed match of what probably was going to be 2 or 3 locations. There's definitely a point in the castle when you're in the sewers, fighting the insects, that could have been in the island or in its own sewer level. And then the forge level, there really is just a small forge area that doesn't make any sense to be in the castle at all. And then there's really no continuation on the idea of the forge. Although, if you took a couple of the iconic places where there was water, there's this long hallway with 2 water bridges. If you had replaced that with just lava, then you would have had another lava section there. Um, and then there's maybe one other section that you could turn into lava, but it would still really only give you 3 kind of big rooms, where you still would need probably closer to 7 rooms, medium and large rooms. I'm playing on normal difficulty, which is all you get when you start with no save file, and I'm dying more than I thought I would. I honestly thought I would have been able to just breeze through it, and if I was playing on the GameCube or with the Wiimote particularly, I probably wouldn't have died even once, because those versions of the games were, I think, considerably easier. Also, if I was just playing with a mouse, I probably would be doing way better instead of a controller, but I'd have to actually be good at doing shooting with the first-person shooting, a mouse and keyboard. And I just don't have any experience that way. But I'm not doing terribly, so I don't really have any real problem there. The biggest problem with Resident Evil 4 is just still running very low on bullets and not being able to upgrade the capacities. Almost certainly what I did wrong was I upgraded the capacities of the first guns early in the game, assuming I'd get more upgrades on a faster trajectory when I really wouldn't. You probably shouldn't upgrade the capacities on any guns until you're at least at the castle, and leave it at that, and only upgrade when your bullet is complete, when your gun is completely empty. Even though I had a ton of money finding all the treasures and stuff, upgrades are still expensive enough that I'm back down to not really having any money. And the only thing that potentially could have been different is I could get the Minesweeper and the mine layer gun or whatever it is, and perhaps get mines as drops, but perhaps not. Interestingly, because of the Resident Evil 4 tweaks of the fan mod, changing the field of view, there are several sequences, particularly when you're playing as Ashley and she's getting knocked down and fighting the Lost Plagueis in the suits of armor. When she gets knocked down, you can clearly see up her skirt in white pantsuit underwear, which I'm sure the Japanese would have loved to do that, but somebody in Capcom, cooler heads, less perverted heads, came in there and said, no, we're going to change the field of view on this. We're going to make sure that isn't something you can see in the original game. And it may very well have just been a effect of making the game better by having the field of view closer so you could see more of the screen anyways. Remember, Resident Evil 4 would have been doing between 512 lines of interlaced image to somewhere around probably closer to 480p progressive images than 720p progressive images. So there's not a lot of pixel square space there to have a wider field of view. And I'm still just playing the game at 1080p. There is also definitely a difference as far as what is expected or what would have been established when that game came out originally, as far as just how close over the shoulder third person perspective would have been. Alright, I have just screwed myself, haven't I? Hmm. Hmm. Let's see if we can activate this effect. Hmm. Hmm. But yeah, it doesn't really add anything to the game to see Ashley's underwear, other than to horny teenage boys in Japan or otherwise, or horny middle-aged men in Capcom. Um, so it does make a lot of sense to not go down that route. There is a much bigger problem of characterization that is highlighted right in the middle uh, of the castle section. You have Lewis, who pops up for a couple of cutscenes and is just not really a character. He really should have been potentially combined with the dog that helps you against the first El Gigante, and he should have been with you at the very beginning of the game, and there should have been an implication of a relationship that existed before the beginning of the game between Leon and Lewis, that he was a specially assigned agent for the area to help Leon. He could have very well been the escort quest character that that you had with you throughout the vast majority of the first section of the game, the whole village section. And then when you rescued the president's daughter, he could say a cheesy line, which at that time, Resident Evil as a series was cheesy, and so it explains a lot of the bad dialogue and the cheesiness. Is that they were definitely going for that, and they definitely weren't paying anybody to do good writing. But yeah, he could have just said, like, three's a crowd at that point and run off or been captured. But you could have really established him a lot more. And since they don't do that, he just kind of unceremoniously gets killed in the middle of the castle section and just reveals himself as a non-character. You also run into Ada Wong, who is a non-character in the main story. You just have no idea who she is or what she's done. They mentioned Wesker. For a lot of people who would have been GameCube only, this would have been their first Resident Evil game. They wouldn't have known Ada Wong. They wouldn't have known Wesker. So she just shows up to be a bit of fan service as far as just like the devil in the red dress, Temptress character. But yeah, in the breadth of less than an hour, you have Ada Wong show up and say basically nothing. You have Lewis show up twice and say basically nothing and get killed. And then you have Ashley, who is really just a nothing of a character also, because she's just not like written well at all. There's a point in the castle where she runs off because she's scared, because she's coughing up blood, and then she gets captured and you just don't see her for about an hour of gameplay, and then she comes back and she's then more mature after that hour of being just chained to a wall and much more glad to see Leon, when really it's the kind of character development that really shouldn't happen in an hour. Like, the development of Ashley as a character is very little, but she really does go from being the president's daughter who doesn't care about Leon at all and is just being rescued by him, which is fairly realistic, that I'm sure president's children don't care about the Secret Service type agents around them or have any real relationship around them. They probably get cycled in and out fairly quickly. But then you would have had to, throughout the course of the entire game, start to develop a appreciation or relationship there, not over the course of an hour. And honestly, it would have made some sense to hand some kind of knife or some kind of gun to Ashley, but then you wouldn't get that section where she wouldn't have any weapons on her, and then she's ridiculously throwing torches. Well, suffice it to say, I didn't understand that deck. Didn't we get 50 gems for that game, so I want to give that one a second try. My sleep schedule is still a nightmare. There really isn't that much more to say about Resident Evil 4. I'm just going through it and really not saying anything as far as commentary. This is by far very far on the spectrum of I'm just playing a video game to just play a video game. The fan-made HD textures makes the game look great, but then there are just real problems. And the more I play Resident Evil 4, the more I realize that the remake really does need to happen, not just for control reasons, but for storyline reasons. RE4 needs to be kind of pushed into being a more serious experience. There is definitely an argument too around taking some of the Leon aspects of RE6 and squeezing that into RE4's remake and trying to merge whatever good you can get out of RE4, 5, and 6 into one new RE4, because you're still running into the main problem of RE5, in which unless you just have 2 African characters that are playable, and only 2 African characters that are playable in an RE5 remake, there is going to be, perhaps even louder now than before, this perception of having white people in Africa shooting Africans for the entire game. And Capcom was very surprised about those complaints because they just didn't think of it being Japanese. Japanese have more of a benevolent racism to dark-skinned people than any negative racism. So it just never really occurred to them that would have been a problem, and I kind of believe them on that. That the Japanese just wouldn't have thought about that at all. Let's try this again. This is 25. This is 17. This is 8. This is a 7-star. So yeah, they've really got to address that. They then also have to really address the elephant in the room as far as what they're going to do with Resident Evil 6, because that game is just awful. 19. So yeah, I guess there's, yeah, there definitely is some issues there. Just some real issues there as far as what the Resident Evil series is going to do or go. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Alright, well, let's move on. Yeah, since I am starting up late and all of that, then I need to really just... That was a waste. Well, that worked nicely. I also watched this Netflix movie that was just advertised to me called Slumberland, which was interesting little kid flick. I'm also watching more Shadow and Bone. Just what happened is because my sleep schedule is so weird and I'm just waking up at like 5 or 6 in the evening and then staying up and then falling asleep again. There are just periods in which I don't want to actively make video game footage, so I am like increasingly just... Let's see, well, this is 8 stars to get to a 25. Let's instead do this and destroy that. This is definitely slower than the Zodiac deck. I see the strategy here somewhat in that the pendulum summon, but it is slow. The Inside Job animated comedy series about the Illuminati and such, and conspiracy theories, has its part 2, which I very quickly also burned through like 4 episodes of that. I'm gonna burn through, I imagine, the remaining episodes, whether that's 4 or whether they've gotten up to maybe having more than 8 episodes per part. Inherently, we still have yet to see anything we really haven't seen anything happen with Netflix to make it make a little bit more sense that animation would really happen, or happen with anybody really, that where it would make any sense that anything with animation would happen better. So it creates the same Rick and Morty problem, the same Simpsons problem, same Family Guy problem, where the animation, regardless of quality, takes forever and there's just not enough episodes. Netflix, I think, more than anything, also really fails at staggering the releases of episodes. So being able to just marathon Inside Job is probably a mistake, considering how Netflix doesn't have enough coming out every day, every couple of weeks, to counter marathoning for any one viewer. It may have barely enough to try to appease a lot of people, but it's never that the one person. Although maybe it is also a case that I just have way too much free time to watch TV. But yeah, I don't know what else to do particularly. I'm still watching a ton of YouTube, and I don't even talk about the garbage I'm watching constantly on YouTube. And yeah, without actually talking about Twitter, there's going to be a lot of people leaving Twitter, I think. Or at least it's very possible. This is a 4-star. Can we bring back this 4-star? Yes. Why can't I summon this 4-star with Pendulum Summon? That should have worked. Well, color me confused. Seems like I would have been able to Pendulum Summon this character. Yeah, I guess I'm in just this kind of weird position where, as long as I'm playing Resident Evil 4, I'm really just not doing anything else. I really do need to get back to Breath of the Wild after Resident Evil 4, and I think I'll probably would have enough footage to justify doing that, as long as I schedule it. Which I need to get back into scheduling too, I'm sure. Making less footage and really only covering one game and then increasing to YouTube Shorts does seem, or increasing the amount of YouTube Shorts seems like the trend to chase for the moment. Plus, my YouTube Short system seems like it's kind of working for just getting more eyes in front of my content, although YouTube Shorts are barely my content. But yeah, there's nothing else I can really think of doing. This time, Pendulum Summon, summon this, put that in attack position. Yeah, I just don't think this effect is going to work. Let's activate this effect first. Add this. Special summon. Guess this? It's stronger. And tribute this. I have just no idea what I'm trying to do here. Seemed like we kind of had everything we would have needed. Yeah, that's terrible. 13 and 12. I didn't think of that through at all. Well, I guess since I have really nothing else to say, we should just go through the news. I think we had already talked about this. what I probably need to do is rewrite the code on Video Games Chronicles website, because I was skipping like the top one bookmark point, and because of the way they bookmark articles, and I think that's created a situation here where I'm just ending up covering the last two articles for some reason from the last time we stopped covering the news. So I'm fairly certain we talked about Modern Warfare 2's competitive multiplayer playlist being delayed. Plus, I don't care about Modern Warfare 2. Personally, I would just stop talking about it, but it is news, and I'm not curating the news so much. It is much better as an attempted video game journalist to talk about the news and then give an opinion to say, well, this really isn't news, but people are reporting it like news, than it is to say, I'm just not going to talk about it, and I'm just going to effectively censor other news sources or other journalists. Yep. Well, in that second game, I'll say I did understand the deck, and it just didn't work for me. Interesting that I activated the spell somehow when this is the anti-spell festival. Alright. Ooh, there's actually quite a bit of cards, spell cards, in this deck. It would be difficult to make your own custom deck from that. Let's see if Flow Ender is any better. No. Alright, well then let's just select another loner and give that a try. Yeah, the vast majority of this really is just going to boil down to using more traps or some other gimmick instead of anti-spell. I don't think we're going up or down ranks in the festival. That would be fairly unfair. Moving on with news, the oft-delayed Dead Island 2 has been pushed back again. The game's release date has slipped from February to April of 2023. Yeah, Dead Island 2 has been in development hell, and still seems to be in development hell. If anything, this is probably the best example, speaking kind of Twitter, without talking about Twitter, this is probably the best example of a publisher owning the rights to a game, but then losing all of the talent to make the game. Because at least the common belief is that practically all the talent that worked on Dead Island 1, which Dead Island 1 was barely even a good game in itself, left to form Techland and made Dying Light. And Dying Light is an amazing game. So, as Dying Light 1 got better and better, Dead Island 2 had to feel this need to compete with that, because those comparisons were going to be made. And the good news is Dying Light 2 came out, and it was still a good game, but not amazingly well received, from what I can get the general feeling of. So Dead Island 2 has a real chance. But also, the Dead Island series has just never seemed to like it was a priority, and that people were actually funding it well, giving it to the right team. Because there's also Dead Island Riptide, remaster of Dead Island 1, which is worse in some ways than the yeah, the remaster of Dead Island 1 is in some ways worse than Dead Island 1. I guess you do this and just destroy it. Since I wasn't strong enough anyways. But yeah, Dead Island 2, in my opinion, should be delayed as much as it needs to. There's just no point in even making a game called Dead Island 2 unless it can be a good game. And I think that's fairly true for all games, regardless of whether they're sequels or not. There's nothing inherently in the idea of Dead Island that guarantees it a failure. If this card is destroyed by card effects and sent to the graveyard, trying to just learn here and the opponent surrenders. And that may be about the only way I get any real victories here. The 500 versus 50 is the difference between a loss and a win. So, really gonna have to win. American McGee had been somewhat silent on his live streams. Been on a vacation, I think is what he was on, with his family, and I can't really begrudge him that, although it is weird that he doesn't just let his little assistant yes man character do some streams without him when he's not around. And American McGee has came out and said, and this is what the actual news as far as the live stream is, that the design bible for Alice Asylum, he's planning on it being finished kind of by the end of the year, so before January 1st 2023, and then he is looking for $30 million in publisher / developer publisher funding, really, I guess, to start the process of actually making the game Alice Asylum. However, he has totally changed his mind as to how he wants to do this, and this definitely comes off and feels very much like a Yandere Simulator scheme in which things are just changing. And I'll leave it to you to decide whether you think that's what's going on here or not. But it does to me seem like well, guess this might work. Yeah. American McGee now wants to hire a developer completely instead of his hope, I guess, before was that was that he was going to build a new company, just straight up build a new company, set himself up as a CEO as far as a video game company, whatever Spicy Horse it was is definitely not the company that he wants to scale up and hire talent to develop Alice Asylum. He wants to start over. At least that was his plan. Now he wants to hire a completely third-party developer, which honestly would probably lead to a better game anyway, so it's not the worst decision as far as the quality of the product. It is just a weird decision to say all we can do these days, or to actively just admit that all American McGee and Spicy Horse as a company can do is draw some pictures and create a design bible and just have the generic ideas, but they don't have the talent to turn the generic ideas into actual lines of code. And he just wants an entire developer to do it. American McGee claims that in the past, these third-party developers worked on like Alice Madness Returns, and that there were multiple third-party developers who worked on multiple parts of it, and then it was just Spicy Horse cutting and pasting those parts together to make a finished product, and that's believable. Honestly, I think that is pretty much how a lot of game development has happened in the past, and a lot of game development happens even now. But it is also, it admits that if you think American McGee at any point, at least in Madness Returns, probably even in the first game, had a major effect on just how it was coded and how it played, and that the game was better because of that, you're definitely not going to get that in Alice Asylum. The good news there, I think, is I don't think very many people do feel that way. I don't think the coding, the programming, or anything like that was the highlight of the Alice game series so far, or it has been in the past. Why he only wants 30 million is the question that I didn't get, as I was barely watching the stream, just here and there. He really just repeats himself a lot. And yeah, the Plushy Dreadfuls spin-off thing really is all that his team and Spicy Horse seem to be really doing, is creating these monstrous plushies that people seem to somewhat like, or a niche audience seems to like. Which inherently it is unfair to expect a businessman to have only one business, but that is generally how you expect companies to succeed. As soon as we saw Randy Pitchford, in comparison, start to focus on Borderlands movies and being Hollywood, Gearbox also stopped getting as much attention as far as Borderlands games. Let's see. If I p-scaled this, could I then do something to special summon something? I don't think so. Yeah, I still am rooting for the Alice series. I am not so much rooting for American McGee as a series, as a creator of the series. Like, as nasty as it seems at times when people steal the intellectual property and the ideas from from creative people, it sometimes feels like that would be, it almost certainly would have been better had EA just done an EA thing and stolen the complete rights to Alice and then pushed out some Alice games without maybe American McGee on the title or American McGee involved at all. In the same way that the Hellraiser series, just to keep the license, made a bunch of terrible Hellraiser movies. Like the last couple of them in particular, just blatantly, obviously, no effort movies. It's just... Destroy 2 traps. Inherently, and I'll move on because there really isn't that much to say here, American McGee also is stealing the concept of a crazy Alice, which is not that creative a concept in video games. Like he is a copyright troll effectively on that concept, and so between any depiction that looks anything like Disney, you run into the risk of Disney suing you, the Disney Alice in Wonderland movies. Or if you try to make a game around Alice in Wonderland, you have American McGee potentially stealing that. Even his name, American, is kind of this like stolen concept. It's like nobody else can call themselves American something in video games, otherwise they'd probably get stolen. And notably, he's not that much of an American. He may have been born in America, but he's living in China with a Chinese family, and he is raw Chinese. So, if anything, he's embraced the Chinese business philosophy of stealing ideas, or just fast and loose as far as how you do business. I wouldn't be surprised if he's kind of a nightmare to work with, and that's why we haven't seen this Alice series being more of a thing. Because inherently, with the niche hit of a fairly early PC game in American McGee's Alice, and then with them willing to put out Madness Returns and that perhaps not selling enough to continue the series, they really should just be putting something else out. And we are just in a very different position now, where sequels, remakes are all the rage. So I wouldn't be surprised if EA should be putting out remakes, reboots of the entire series. It would almost make more sense to reboot the whole series and take American McGee's name off of it for EA. But EA is just not really making games, and they're more interested, I guess, in sports games, which make them guaranteed profits, or Star Wars games, which sometimes get made, but that also has a high chance of profit. EA almost certainly is not interested in a middle tier game that only makes a little bit of profit, or a small game that only makes a small amount of profit but costs less. which arguably maybe Alice Asylum in itself is not a game that actually costs that much less. Yeah, and we may just be seeing kind of the death of the small game, particularly for EA. But yeah, if I was a game developer, I definitely would, in my long list of ideas of games, want to be able to cover the public domain story of Alice in Wonderland without the lawyers coming back immediately and saying, well, Disney will sue you, EA will sue you, and I'm sure another whole collection of other characters will sue you. And honestly, I guess the best way to do that would be to just be an independent person and put something out on Steam Direct around Alice in Wonderland. Something so small that Disney and EA wouldn't even hear about it. Although there really isn't even that much around the Alice in Wonderland series that you need to make a game. Like, the general concept is you have a young girl going into a fantasy world. You can easily do that without invoking Alice in Wonderland. And you see that plenty of other times happen. Forsaken actually is kind of that same idea. Somewhat young girl, not that young, but going to a fantasy world and seeing a bunch of weird stuff. That's Forsaken in a nutshell, and it looks nothing like Alice in Wonderland. And if anything, Forsaken might be a great example of where people start with an elevator pitch of it's an Alice in Wonderland parody, or it's similar to Alice in Wonderland, and then the elevator pitch eventually gets evolved to a higher state where you have new characters that look different, that have different names, and you have creatives actually creating something new. Yeah, pretty much every time I see American McGee stream, though, I'm somewhat disappointed with the slow progress. There is definitely weirdness around the general idea of let's see. Yep. I'm just activating these traps when I really don't know what they do. Yeah, and I lost my train of thought, so let's just move on with the news. Like, I also, at this point, pretty much need to stop playing, even though we really haven't made anything. Volition, this is surprising news, somewhat, is going to be part of Gearbox after a disappointing reception to Saints Row. Gearbox has all of the tools to create future success at Volition, the Embracer CEO says. So Volition, as a company, has been basically absorbed / shut down. What's interesting to this is the first example, I think, of Embracer Group starting to kind of implode after its massive absorption of a bunch of characters and businesses. This also sets up a weird point to point out that there is just no Gearbox anymore. It just doesn't really exist in the way it used to exist. Gearbox is now this brand that Embracer Group is using, which is oddly the third or fourth renaming of THQ to go THQ going bankrupt, and then Nordic Games being the resurrection of THQ, and then Nordic Games changing their name to THQ Nordic, and then spinning off in a parent company of Embracer Group, and then Embracer Group acquiring Gearbox, and now Gearbox having a new office in Shanghai called Gearbox Shanghai on top of Gearbox Montreal, and I think a Gearbox Quebec also. So it seems like it is very much just a lot of people changing names. There very possibly has been some talent drain in Gearbox Dallas, Frisco, Texas, and Volition may be the team they're trying to bring in to support that. Like Borderlands 3, there's really nothing wrong with it, but it didn't catch people's attention that much, and they're now promoting Tales from the Borderlands, and I'm not really hearing anybody say anything about that at all. Although, how would I hear anything at all? Because I'm just not listening to anybody, and that's still a major problem. Is that I need basically to find a list of YouTubers who are tolerable to listen to, that are small content creators, people that have somewhere between probably 20,000 and a million subscribers, and maybe a million subscribers even is a little too high, but actually do talk about video games fairly frequently. But also, I'm not looking for people that are just trying to be like Video Game Donkey and do their own thing, which a lot of people are doing their own thing. I probably should just be watching more Twitch. Twitch would satisfy a lot of that need. But also, when I'm listening to YouTube or listening to podcasts, I really don't want to hear much about video games. The hope here, and I guess we can only live in hope, is that the people at Volition who thought it was a good idea to make a new game called Saints Row and reboot the series and completely ignore and basically spit in the face of the original series, the hope is that those people are gone and that they aren't in charge. The danger here is that those people are still at Volition and they are just going to infect their failure on Gearbox, and that brings Gearbox down even further. I can certainly say a lot of what people didn't like about the Saints Row series was the kind of woke advertising at the beginning, and so that is what people didn't like at the beginning. But for people who gave it a chance and actually played the game after some subset of potential players being scared off just by the woke trailer at the beginning, people that actually stayed with the game and played it really were able to highlight that there was way more problems, just incredibly more problems with the Saints Row reboot. The game is buggy, unbeatable, with so many bugs. Let's see. So this attraction deck is built around this whole circus theme, which it's a real tight theme, I'll say. visually. Yeah. So I don't know what real talent you have at Volition when they turn out a game like that. Is this possibly a thing where Saints Row was set up to fail because Embracer Group wasn't actually funding it and wasn't willing to put any more funding into the development of the Saints Row reboot? Does Volition / Embracer Group own Saints Row, or is that owned by somebody else as an IP? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if what really is going to happen is almost none of the talent from Volition actually ends up at Gearbox, and they simply just let Gearbox make Saints Row games in kind of contrast of Borderlands as a series. At a certain level, I guess, if you did want to get rid of if you did want to stop the process of this isn't gonna work. Yeah, if you wanted to stop the process of the what am I trying to say? If the people at Gearbox wanted to stop making Borderlands games, and they wanted to start making Saints Row games, or if they wanted to have like 1 year is a Saints Row games, one year is a Borderlands game that sets it in different environments. It also has different kind of goals. Saints Row doesn't need to have the bazillion different guns concept or monster concepts or anything. Saints Row can be slightly more realistic without being too realistic, or it could be completely realistic if they wanted to go in that direction and just reboot the reboot. I feel like there's a high chance of maybe some pride, and we'll see the characters from the Saints Row reboot come back and they'll try again, like for just how petty some game developers often are. But that's just speculation on my part. Yeah, I guess it's all speculation, and I guess we have to kind of just leave it at that. It'll be interesting to see what Gearbox is at this point, which it seems like it's kind of nothing. I definitely don't have a lot of hope that all of a sudden you're going to see a team of people from any point of any Gearbox. No. Don't do that. Maybe do that now. Alright, I'm gonna try this. Let's see if this works. Lackluster Soldier Chaos. Attack this guy. 1500 attack. Banish one card on the field. Alright, we've got something there. Yeah, I guess overall I just don't have a lot of high hopes that Embracer Group is going to do Gearbox very well by adding Volition to Gearbox, even though it sounds like they may be trying to help Gearbox in doing that. And I definitely doubt Volition is going to do well, or even deserves to do well, by being part of Gearbox. And we really just have not seen anything happen with Embracer Group as far as good products coming out. They really lost any enthusiasm I would have had around it when Darksiders 3 just kind of failed to be as good of a game as it really should have been, and that their only real success why did that not happen? Well, that sucks. I was supposed to get a second attack and something stopped it from happening. Well, I should have just increased the attack then. Moving on with the news, eFootball 2023 Season 2 has started, adding 40 national teams and Maradona, if you're interested in that. 2 former Square Enix employees have been arrested on suspicion of insider trading. The pair are believed to have traded shares before a new Dragon Quest game was announced. I believe there's a third person who has also been arrested. Yeah, and we'll talk about him. But a Japanese tech site reports that Taisuke Sasaki and Fumiaki Suzuki were arrested for acquiring stock in Japanese developer Aiming shortly before the announcement of a Dragon Quest game. Which Dragon Quest game is incredibly popular, so yeah. That sounds like a big no-no, particularly if they are attempting here to if the Japanese are actually arresting people, that's tends to be the case, that they will be found guilty in Japan, whether they... Well, I don't think too many innocent people have ever been proven to be sent to jail or in Japan, but I imagine there is a kind of high amount of weirdness there. The main thing is you just don't want to be arrested anywhere. Ever. Just kind of summon this without trying to figure out what it does. Insider trading happening in Japan also may be an indication of just a weakening economy in general. There isn't really as much of a desire, I think, by Japanese people to be filthy rich or filthy richer. Obviously there's some desire there, but like, that sucks. But yeah, I suspect that's something. Now you could live in some hope, I guess, that possibly the Yeah. You could potentially live in some hope that possibly these are the bad people at Square Enix, although it seems like Square Enix top to bottom is just full of a bunch of bad managers, and I mean bad at their job and bad at making decisions as far as making games. And so maybe 3 of them have been arrested, and maybe everybody else at Square Enix would clean up their act and actually make games and do things better, but I think that's probably unlikely. I imagine there is just a lot of old fogies running Square Enix making bad decisions still, and unless Square Enix went completely bankrupt and a whole new company bought the name, that's about the only way I would have any faith that Square Enix would start doing a better job. It's funny that here they're still even using the logos that are showing Lara Croft, because I don't think Square Enix even owns Tomb Raider anymore. And then they're just heavily, Square Enix is trying to lean on Final Fantasy for profits, and that's about it. Nier Automata stands out as really more of an exception than a rule, in my mind. Alright, well, for putting an hour in, we were able to try each loner deck and find that I guess the blue one is probably our best one, but they're all incredibly slow. And we're at like 1500, so we're here. We need to get here to at least get that, and ideally we want to get here. So it is seemingly going to be yet another very slow, very boring experience as far as the festivals go. We do have some festival things that this is seemingly the only way they want to give you any opportunity to earn more gems is by giving you 10 days to accomplish all of these, which, yeah, activate half of the traps so far, nearly half of the special summons, a fourth of the normal summons, and maybe a sixth of the duels. And then our daily quest would want us to do some more damage. And then seemingly I'm still missing a lot of days here. Like, we're at day 15 of 30, and then there's 11 days left, so I missed 4 days somehow. I don't know how that happens. Also, we have the whole duel pass that I'll just receive all. So we're slowly making progress to that. But I just really never have any time to try and do anything with that. Like, even right now, during this whole anti-spell festival, I could try and make and craft a bunch of normal cards, but I don't know if that would help me in any way. Alright, let's just focus on the news now. Blizzard games are set to be pulled in China after a dispute with NetEase over licenses. NetEase exec bemoans how much damage a jerk can make, is the quote here. Which I guess either NetEase said that in English or that's being translated from Chinese. Now, who is the jerk in this case? One would potentially assume it's somebody at Activision Blizzard, but you just don't really know. It could be the CEO of Activision Blizzard is the jerk they're referring to. It could be that Blizzard has their own jerk in their mind that's a different jerk as far as NetEase. On one level, since the Chinese government's NetEase have never really done anything to inspire confidence about them following licenses and doing things right, or doing things in a globally legal copyright correct way, I wouldn't be surprised if NetEase is trying to make some claims that they straight up own some of Blizzard's content or material. I also wouldn't be surprised if NetEase makes a cheap ripoff or game based a cheap ripoff game based off of an Activision Blizzard thing as soon as these games are pulled out. I wouldn't be surprised if these games are being sold in back alleys by NetEase still after they don't have the rights to it. We've seen similar situations happen in China, and the Chinese government is heavily likely to actually support Chinese companies over foreign companies in just protectionism. Although maybe they wouldn't really support video game companies so much as other companies. The Lepin Lego suit was shocking when the Chinese government actually sided with Lego for Lepin stealing concepts and box art from Lego. But yeah, none of that has happened yet, so like, who knows? Does it matter to a foreigner, to a Westerner, that Blizzard games aren't going to be in China? Maybe a little bit, because this may mean that Activision Blizzard now has to focus less on trying to be an esports type company, which really they should kind of be an esports type company. People playing StarCraft and Warcraft, well, I don't think people esports wise were playing Warcraft, but StarCraft, and then Hearthstone and their Heroes of the Storm, like all of that, there are elements of those games that were either very popular in esports or made specifically to be popular in esports, which dragged whatever remaining talent still is at Blizzard towards making games they really didn't want to make. Whereas you look at Ben Brode and his Marvel Snap game, which I'm still playing and wasting a lot of time on. That game is totally not designed for esports as you would imagine esports. You're not going to go to a tournament and see people playing for hours and hours Marvel Snap, and there's not going to be any actions per minute kind of thought or long tournaments around Marvel Snap or long strategies around Marvel Snap. So yeah, he's made a very, very different game in Marvel Snap. It's not even anything like Hearthstone. So yeah, World of Warcraft, Hearthstone, Warcraft 3 Reforged, and Overwatch, and StarCraft series, Diablo 3, and the Heroes of the Storm will all be suspended. Blizzard has had licensing agreements with NetEase since 2008. Diablo Immortal's co-development and publishers covered under a separate agreement between the two companies and won't be affected. So the one game nobody cares about is under a different agreement. In a statement, Blizzard claimed it has not reached a deal to renew the agreements that is consistent with Blizzard's operating principles and commitments to players and employees, and the agreements are set to expire. It could also be that NetEase just wanted to put a lot of microtransactions, which would be more in line with Chinese games, in there. Earlier this year, it's claimed that Blizzard and NetEase had canceled an unannounced World of Warcraft mobile game following a financial dispute. Everybody's probably struggling to squeeze more blood from the stone. Also, I would say, by them just not renewing this contract, that maybe doesn't hurt Activision Blizzard that much and makes Activision Blizzard look like a smaller company that then may get approved more. Like the situation with the Chinese licensing and Chinese companies having to work with Western companies to publish games in China is slightly different, so I'm fairly certain China is not involved in the approval of the Activision Blizzard merger, because there isn't actually a Activision Blizzard company in China. Um, so the merger, the acquisition there, it's not a merger really, may also have a hand in this, certainly. Or it may have a counter effect. It may be that Microsoft does acquire Activision Blizzard, and then all of a sudden negotiations are back on the table with NetEase, and then all these games are back in China, which really still probably wouldn't affect Westerners at all. The other issue certainly there is we have yet to see Microsoft be hands-on that much with any of the companies they've acquired. I think they did something relatively recently, but I couldn't even tell you what it was. But to start to straighten the ship, Microsoft in general finally forced Bill Gates to step down, so he's no longer on the board after a report came out that they had to do an internal review because Bill Gates says it was consensual, but it's not even clear that it was. Bill Gates was sleeping around with an employee at Microsoft, and so they finally forced him out. Bill Gates, frat boy mentality, far too old to have that kind of frat boy mentality. And yeah, Bill Gates, I think when somebody writes the true biography of his life, is really going to start highlighting that he was just rather good at promoting himself and making himself look somewhat positive when he was actually always doing some shady stuff in the background. And who knows, maybe he really was hanging out with Epstein and doing some really, really shady stuff. And there are pictures of him hanging out with him. So Bill Gates very easily could be the monster that some people think he is. Although the ridiculous idea that he's putting nanobots in 5G and all of that just doesn't even make sense scientifically towards reality. Moving on, video game news, Video Games Chronicles. Legacy of Kain Crystal Dynamics says it, quote, hears fans loud and clear after a 100,000 plus survey response. The company recently launched a questionnaire asking players about a series comeback. Almost certainly the survey was to not so much gauge interest in a potential Legacy of Kain remake, reboot, revival is what they're calling it. It almost certainly was to get enough people in their survey to respond to go to a publisher and get funding. What's interesting here, as far as Crystal Dynamics, I guess then if they're going to focus on Legacy of Kain, then they are probably going to struggle to make any more Tomb Raider games. But you could lower the Tomb Raider games to AA games, which really they should be AA games instead of AAA games, and then come out with a AA Legacy of Kain game and try and just split your resources that way. There's in this article they talk about the Legacy of Kain series. In the past decade, multiple unsuccessful attempts have been made to revive the Legacy of Kain series. In part, I'm sure it's because the visuals just don't look that good, but in part, I think it's a niche fandom that you have to be fairly careful about what kind of game you're going to make and how you're going to sell it. In a lot of ways, Legacy of Kain is probably a lot like the Darksiders series, and putting more money into either the Darksiders series or Legacy of Kain may not guarantee more money coming out. A UK-based Climax studio who made Silent Hill Origins and Silent Hill Shattered Memories spent 3 years on Legacy of Kain Dead Son. before Square Enix canceled it. Square Enix is not in the picture anymore, so it may very well have been that Square Enix was just mismanaging the Legacy of Kain series. The Rocket League makers Psyonix worked on Noskov, which was going to be a competitive multiplayer game based on a Legacy of Kain IP, and once reportedly intended to launch alongside China Climax's title before it too was cancelled in April 2016. So maybe those general ideas might come back, although I doubt the same companies would want to work on it some more. Apparently, scalper bots are slowly starting to lose interest in the PlayStation 5, but it does still remain to be one of the most targeted products despite stock increases. Yeah, I've seen some PlayStation controllers on sale through Slick Deals, as I'm starting to see the beginnings of Black Friday sales. There really isn't a ton as far as video games. Xbox controllers are a little bit cheaper. If I had a little bit more budget, I'd get myself another controller at this point. Just an Xbox Core controller. They may be potentially upgrading / replacing them next year with slightly better versions of the Core controller. They're still not going to be the Elite type controllers, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Core Plus model that has a little bit better technology in it, or different parts, just because they can't source the parts. If you go to Target, you can get an Xbox Series S for like $250 plus a gift card, or $300 plus a $70 gift card, or something like that, which isn't a terrible idea. I don't know if the Target Red credit card would help you even better on that, but I'm seeing a lot of Xbox Series S for $250. I'm seeing PlayStation PS5s for sale at regular price and somewhat in stock. There's no more games, I imagine, that are going to come out before Black Friday to push more sales, and even if they did come out, they wouldn't really be on sale. TVs obviously will be on sale. Surround sound systems, not so much. So yeah, there's not a ton of things. Special things, unique things, gadgets, Raspberry Pis, things like that are almost never on sale in Black Friday, and I don't expect them to be on sale this year. And otherwise, I pretty much have everything I want and probably need. Like the 2 Amazon Prime Day early access sales satisfied my desires fairly well. Let's see. Crystal Dynamics claims that the Perfect Dark development is going extremely well, which that's good news to hear, and I guess you just have to believe them. Embracer Group also provides updates on Tomb Raider and Guardians of the Galaxy, which I guess there's a new Tomb Raider in development and a new Guardians of the Galaxy game in development, because the last Guardians of the Galaxy game I thought was already out and finished. I didn't think it was an episodic thing. And I don't think they've really announced a actual new Tomb Raider game. The next Tomb Raider game has entered development using Unreal Engine 5. That was announced in April. And then last year's Guardian of the Galaxy recently hit a new player milestone. Yeah. It was recently claimed a new Deus Ex game was in very early development. So it sounds to me like Crystal Dynamics is doing everything it should be doing, although it is certainly cooking with a lot of pots here. Like, Embracer Group owning Crystal Dynamics, I can't help but be afraid that one or two of these projects are going to be handed to some other company that may do worse with those products. Or maybe they're just setting themselves up with a really nice tight schedule in which they're going to be working on 2 games at all times for the foreseeable decade plus. Like, it's not like they have a huge laundry list of games here. It's maybe 6. So if 2 are supposed to be released over the course of 1 year, and then another 2 the next year, and another 2 the next year, you've got a nice tight schedule there. If you can develop 2 games every year on a rolling schedule. Although that almost implies that you would have 4 to 6 different teams working on projects. Moving on, Warzone 2's proximity chat is already causing chaos and peace deals. Yeah. We'll leave it at that since I don't care about that. Here's the Microsoft Black Friday deal, including $50 off the Xbox Series X. Series S, not Series X. This is on the Microsoft Store. Up to 30% off select controllers. Up to 40% on SteelSeries accessories. BioPlay Portal from Bang & Olufsen. I have no idea what that is. Sounds like some kind of subwoofer. Then Thrustmaster accessories and Razer accessories. Some of these are definitely not official Microsoft controllers and products, which I wouldn't recommend people really getting special accessories or controllers for their products unless you're just really into flight simulating or racing. They're always just too expensive. Let's see. Battlefield 2042 hits Xbox Game Pass Ultimate and EA Play on November 22nd. DICE has revealed that Battlefield 22 Season 3 will launch next week. Also don't care about Battlefield. The next free Epic Games Store titles have been revealed. Star Wars Squadrons will replace Evil Dead the game and Dark Deity. Okay. I'm a little surprised that Epic hasn't decided to stop giving away games as frequently at this point, but heck, it gets people to go back to the storefront, and I guess some small percentage of people are going to the storefront page on Epic and actually buying some games when they do that. Ubisoft releases a Splinter Cell remake art. We're aiming to create a top tier remake. This art doesn't particularly scream top tier visuals to me, I'd have to say. This isn't blurred because it's a static image, so my blurring feature is not doing that. The problem with Splinter Cell in particular is it is just going to be somebody in the shadow and in stealth most of the time anyways. So you have a very dark color palette you have to work within to start with. So having like dirty brown walls and a shadow being shown and some lighting effects being shown isn't really highlighting much there. Are these supposed to be more pictures of Splinter Cell, or are these pictures of something else? Again, just a lot of dark screenshot syndrome in those pictures. Yeah. If anything, if I was in charge of remaking Splinter Cell, I would have to say, let's invoke the idea of stealth without being chained down to the idea of stealth, because stealth never really worked in games. Like, almost always, most players were not able to 100% stealth through a level. They would always raise an alarm. They'd always need a gun to shoot the people once they started shooting. It would always devolve into a firefight. In the games that I have played in the past where it is 100% stealth and you're just killed the second you are caught, that's never really that fun. That's something that happens in Resident Evil 4, is there's a point where you're fighting a bad guy, and if you don't do the quick time event dodge, it just kills you, and you just get a game over, and that's not fun. There's no value in that at all. So, fortunately, more modern games are more generous than that, but it still highlights the same problem. Plus, on top of stealth never really working because players can't really do stealth really doesn't work as far as making experiences that are that fun. If you're going to make a game that was pure stealth or true stealth, it probably should be like a puzzle mobile game instead of a AAA hyper-realistic game. So I definitely would want more characterization of the Splinter Cell characters. I'd want more of a story, and I would want more missions that are probably just run and gun shooting and what people tend to expect. So I probably wouldn't be the right person to make a true to its original nature remake of Splinter Cell in the first place, but yeah, that I would lean to change it a lot in the remake. Maybe that will happen, maybe that won't happen. So, in continuation of the insider trading arrests, Yuji Naka has reportedly also been arrested as part of the Square Enix insider trading investigation. 2 former Square Enix employees have already been arrested. Yuji Naka, the former Sonic team head and Sonic the Hedgehog programmer, I believe he went on to do the whole Balan Wonderland debacle of the game. If I'm looking at this image, I'm fairly certain this has to do with Balan Wonderland. Maybe he wasn't the main guy in charge of Balan Wonderland, and Balan Wonderland, I guess at this point, is just not relevant enough to even mention in any article. Yeah. Yuji Naka's former employee, where he helmed the critical failure of Balan Wonderland before his departure from the company last year. So, at least in this case, I could see why you might do some insider trading. Is Square Enix screwed you over with Balan Wonderland, or you just did an awful job making Balan Wonderland and then Square Enix kicked you to the curb. Yeah, at that point, if I recall correctly, he was pretty crazy and pretty irate with how Square Enix supported Balan Wonderland. So maybe he was just looking to get some money to retire on. Although it just seems like really weird that like you don't get these kind of high profile insider trading cases in Japan. They don't come to the West very often because Japanese people are just like designed, they've been programmed their entire lives to follow the rules, and we're starting to see a very weird breakdown of this new generation of Japanese people who are effectively, in a very conservative Japanese way, just completely going in a different direction. It's almost like this is a hippie-like movement or a beatnik-like movement in Japan, where these 50-year-olds have spent their entire lives under the thumb of super conservative old Japanese people who are effectively the previous generation, their parents, and now they're saying, no, I'm not going to act like my parents. I'm going to dress wildly and just not wear a suit. I'm not going to work at the same company my entire life. Like politically, I imagine even the politics may be starting to be a little bit more liberal in Japan. And I guess at a certain level, the anime cosplay otaku movement was very much that way too, in that it's very much counterculture of what a 80 or 75-year-old Japanese person would be doing. And there's just kind of a general rejection of culture that has become more the norm, which inherently I don't know if the Japanese culture is any more stable than any other, but it does seem like it is breaking down fairly quickly because it was kind of enforced on them. If you look at the history of Japan, it's been more a collection of states that barely work together, and then the empire had a ridiculously fast westernization from their traditional values into a modern Western values, and that was too big of a shift too fast, almost certainly. And so now you have a kind of culturalist society that is also not having children and growing another generation, so the culture is going to further degrade. But yeah, I'm going on a rant here when really the actual news is just this guy is reportedly been arrested. It is shocking. It's much more shocking to hear somebody was arrested for insider trading than it was to hear the Yakuza actor doing drugs. Like, it's pretty much assumed that there are drugs being done in Japan as there are drugs being done anywhere. And celebrities being given access to drugs and doing drugs is not surprising in the least to a Westerner. But to do something that is not morally debatable, to do something that fairly obviously is wrong, like insider trading, it'd be hard to do mental gymnastics to say insider trading is not wrong. Although inherently, if you got rid of companies being able to sell stocks and made all companies have to be small and only be funded by their own profits, insider trading would not be able to be a thing. Anyways, moving on. Sony has launched its Black Friday sale, including 25% off PlayStation Plus. Let's see if there's anything here. Today is only the 18th, so it's the 26th is Black Friday. You're talking 6 days away. Spider-Man Miles Morales, 50% off. Bunch of other games here. Some of them are fairly new. Are you getting 60% off deals? No. So it's still a little bit expensive, but not that expensive. And for video games, if you need to buy video games for kids, this is the only real deal I imagine you're going to get. And I can say don't get Gotham Knights for sure. You probably don't bother to get Cyberpunk 2077. Part of the problem, I would say, that is both with Microsoft and Nintendo and Sony is that they just don't have anything that they can really offer. Like, the most intriguing bundle that you could put on the table that people wouldn't think about would be subscribe to the Nintendo Game Pass and get a free controller and a voucher for like 50% off of any digital download of a Nintendo game, like a $60 Nintendo Switch game. Like, that's kind of the best kind of deal that people wouldn't consider, is to say, here, let's bundle a bunch of stuff you may not really think about. You could also put on like Nintendo coins or whatever the currency is on the eShop store as something there, whereas Microsoft could like bundle an extra controller with their hardware, or PlayStation could do that, and then they could throw in extra like Game Pass streaming service, But yeah, that's really where I think, since they don't have a lot to offer right now, you would best do it, is to say, we're going to give you this weird awful offer that you never considered and confuse you compared to just a straightforward offer of a discounted price. The kind of offer that inevitably would cause somebody to spend more money than they were planning on spending, but getting more for it. Microsoft Store could say, buy a laptop and we'll give you a free Xbox Series S if the laptop is over like $1,200. Things like that. Sony doesn't really have a Sony store that would sell hardware. Although Sony could, at any point, like partner with Apple, buy an iMac, for instance, and you get a free PlayStation 5 digital edition. Would be a pretty great offer for a lot of people. Let's see. Company of Heroes 3 has been rated for PS5 and Xbox Series X and S in Taiwan. We're getting more information as far as games being rated in Taiwan and Indonesia. So I suspect there might just be more transparency happening in some of these countries as far as games getting rated, or rating systems maybe just being introduced to countries like Taiwan or Indonesia. I imagine rating systems have been around for a while, and they're just better at having their websites be transparent and put out announcements. Let's see, the Nintendo eShop Black Friday sales include savings up to 75%. 60% is your target point there. You want to see games 60% off. That's when you know they're selling it somewhere at what they consider cost, or you're getting a good deal. Although for digital products, 60% off maybe not the best deal ever. So let's see. Metroid Dread is on sale. Mario Odyssey, if you don't have that, I don't know why. Persona 5 Royale, Skyrim, No Man's Sky. Now, are these all digital things? Yeah, so you'd have to download them, which maybe it's better in this case to go to GameStop or go to a library and get these games way cheaper. Still, I definitely would check a GameStop first and potentially even buy a gift card at a GameStop, and then buy the games digitally from that. Yeah. Bayonetta 3 not on this list, even though they are showing a picture of Bayonetta 3. And then Doom Eternal is discounted a lot. I guess part of the Doom Eternal story too is that the soundtrack was recently released, and that Bethesda actively blamed the composer first before he did the 14,000 word comment. So it's not even really a situation where the composer came out of nowhere. It felt like that was the case, but I was just not paying enough attention. It seems like Bethesda attacked first, then he came back with 14,000 words defending himself, and then Bethesda came out and said the defense is totally wrong, and we have documented evidence, but we're not going to show it to anybody unless we sue him. Which, yeah, it definitely is coming off, if I'm understanding the story the way I think I am, more and more like the composer is in the right. And yeah, I really haven't heard anybody try to defend the Doom Eternal soundtrack as saying it's actually good, and I haven't heard anybody really trying to defend Bethesda. It definitely shows an example of where Microsoft should have stepped in and should have had some more oversight and authority. And this might very well be a case of Microsoft just not having enough control over its companies. Unless, of course, that was Microsoft's doing all together and wants to come back in and respond the way Bethesda responds. It's also very possible that that Microsoft is the one that led to the bad response against the composer. You can currently buy a PS5 DualSense controller in Horizon Forbidden West for £45 in the UK, which that's only helpful for people in the UK. The director of Fallout New Vegas would be open to working on the series again, which you would be really dumb to say you're not open to working on the series again. I would be interested in finding out where Josh Sawyer is at the moment. Yeah, he's at Obsidian as a design director, so probably would be fairly hard to get him to be loaned out as an employee or quit Obsidian. But I guess Microsoft does own Obsidian, and so that could happen. He could be transferred to work on Fallout New Vegas 2, I guess is what you'd call it, Fallout New Vegas 2. Although he is also saying, even in the subtitle, that California and the Midwest could be an interesting setting for a new series entry. So whatever game got made, it would be hard to call it New Vegas 2 or something with New Vegas in the name if he wants to put it in California or the Midwest, which, I don't think New Vegas is what you would call the Midwest. Although it kinda is. It still will probably be a long time, and it's another great example. We just need to see if Microsoft really is going to, Microsoft owning Obsidian, Microsoft owning Bethesda is going to lead to better or more Obsidian or Bethesda games getting made. It could be that nothing has changed or very little has changed, and we still won't see a Fallout New Vegas in the next decade, and we still won't see a new Bethesda game or a new Skyrim game, Elder Scrolls game in the next decade. We just kind of have to wait and see. I do definitely also question if, now that we're kind of in a recession, if this mass movement to acquire a bunch of companies is going to actually pay off, or if it isn't just going to lead to a bunch of mass shuttering of companies. It very possibly is going to be a case where there's just going to be fewer and fewer employees that they can find, and acquiring companies may be the only way to get any kind of talent in a business, as fewer and fewer people want to work and there are fewer and fewer people able to work or just in existence to work. Although we may see a lot of companies like Twitter just collapse, and then a lot of people who've never worked in the game industry all of a sudden end up working in the game industry, but that doesn't mean they'll be good at making games. It could be the exact opposite. It's as likely that it would be the exact opposite. Moving on. This is part of the Epic lawsuit, and it claimed that Google paid Activision $360 million to stop it building a rival app store. The update here is Activision Blizzard says the claims made in Epic lawsuit are false. Which, at a certain point, you can't just in a lawsuit straight up lie. So maybe there's some $360 million on some ledger that Epic is going to try and argue was a bribe to not make a rival app store, but Activision Blizzard is definitely saying that's not the case. It would be a shocking twist of fate if Activision Blizzard was secretly working on a Google App Store rival, and by them being acquired by Microsoft, like on day one, Microsoft can then use that code to launch its Android app store that it wants to make, and it's recently announced it wants to make as a competitor. The timing around this, though, almost certainly would be that they would have made just a Battle.net app for Android and required anybody who was going to play any of Activision Blizzard's games would need that Battle.net app. The full quote here is, "To be clear, that's false. Google never asked us, pressured us, or made us agree not to compete with them, and we've already submitted documents and testimony disproving this nonsense." So, like, fairly straightforward, no wiggle room around that. I just don't think Activision Blizzard, had they made a competitive app store, would have succeeded in any way. Like, they would have had to make good Google mobile games in the first place, and they haven't done that yet. Let's see. And then Sonic Prime trailer. The latest Sonic Prime trailer is available if you want to check that out. From the Video Games Chronicles. Which that brings us into Gematsu articles. Marvel's Midnight Suns Welcome to the Abbey trailer is available if you want to check that out. Sword of Vagrant launches for the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch on November 30th, and the PS5 in 2023. It's currently on PC. Yeah. Is this the one where the character is kind of in the lewd outfit? Well, apparently I already own this game. Which, yeah. It's a side-scrolling hack and slash, but she's just kind of in the bikini armor outfit. Which, I can't really complain about that. If that's how you want to depict your characters, let's do the Samus Aran twist, but let's bring it to the 2018 by showing a lot more skin, whereas Justin Bailey codes were needed in Super Metroid. Well, I guess this gives me a great excuse to potentially play that game and try and get it out fairly quickly, but even if I was to play it now, it would be late. But not too late, really. If anything, it would be a great excuse to play that game and then release a second series and just make an exception because the game is slightly newer, which arguably maybe I should do that, is just have a bunch of old game and a bunch of footage for old games that don't really have any relevancy to the time that they'd be released on my channel, and then every now and then when I can play a game that potentially would have relevancy and maybe get more attention, put that out faster and earlier, but be infrequent with that. It's not like my channel is that frequent or that consistent anyways. It's very consistent as far as release of pre-recorded stuff, but as far as streaming, I'm all over the place. I can barely commit to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at some time. Let's see, Soul Hackers 2 version 1.2.02 update is now available. It adds a dash function, speed up battle mode, and 4 new demons, which inherently, when you have a Japanese dungeon crawler or a dungeon crawler in general, and you're adding dash functions and speed up battle modes, that highlights the problem with the concept of dungeon crawlers in general, is that they're too slow. And this is part of the Shin Megami Tensei Persona series, sort of, but it is really its own side story. Street Fighter 6 has a dynamic controls trailer, according to Komatsu. Air Combat 7 Skies Unknown sales have topped 4 million. Samurai Maiden has a trailer for Komimi, if yet another character. Samurai Maiden is the weird kind of Onichambra inspired game with apparently also seems like lesbian relationships, increasing your power. There might be some romance dating simulator aspects also to it, but it's mostly a hack and slash zombie sword game like Onichambara. Earth Defense Force 4.1 The Shadow of New Despair for Switch has 2 new trailers. Interesting to see a trailer show the edges of the Switch. If anything, this is probably to hide how ugly Earth Defense Force games tend to look, even on the Switch. Yeah, I really wish somebody else would take over the Earth Defense Force series and put a little bit more money in it, but it may not sell anymore if they did put more money into it. A game called Warlander launches January 24th for PC and in April for the PS5 and Xbox Series. It looks to me like it's a action multiplayer free-to-play game in kind of a feudal medieval time. I wonder what the difference between saying feudal and medieval really is. I probably should know that. Let's see. Volition has moved from Deep Silver to the Gearbox company. Arguably, this may be a case where Deep Silver is the one that's actually in more trouble. Like, the first cut is to remove the name Volition, which is not the greatest logo or name anyways, but Deep Silver in general may be getting broken up. What's interesting in this way is that they say Saints Row performed in line with management expectations in the quarter. So in one quarter, the management almost certainly expected nothing, and it delivered within that range of nothing. Dead Island 2 being delayed yet again. We talked about that. Dark Pictures Anthology Directive 8020 announced. So yet another Dark Pictures anthology game. I just can't imagine there's ever going to be a time where I'd have enough time to go through all those games. An open world action MMO RPG called Arc Age 2 has been announced for console and PC. Famitsu sales have been updated for this week. Let's see. Tactics Ogre Reborn being the number 2 seller under Splatoon 3. That's shocking for the Nintendo Switch. And then you got God of War Ragnarok falling to 3rd place. Well, I think before the sales were updated, it was actually in 2nd place, but maybe not. It says it's new. It's shocking that Tactics Ogre Reborn from Square Enix is outselling God of War Ragnarok. Even Sonic Frontiers here is outselling the PS4 versions of Tactics Ogre. And then people who want to play Sonic Frontiers don't seem to have PlayStation 5s. Although, and they seem to be playing it on the Switch compared to the PS5 and PS4 versions. Yeah. PS5 not doing particularly well this week as far as software sales. Still doing fairly well as far as hardware sales. And it seems like Xboxes may be back to their old middling numbers as far as sales now that PlayStation 5s are actually available to be purchased. Switch is still severely dominating. Yeah. And there was really no follow-up, I guess, on Nintendo saying we may not repair your hardware in Japan if you're rude to customers. So I think they've probably gotten away with that nasty note. A game called Pretty Princess Magical Garden Island has been announced for Switch, which definitely sounds like a girl game. Yeah, in a lot of ways, it really just looks like a Stardew Valley clone, except for you play as a girl. It doesn't feel like there's anything really that feminine as in the actions or the gameplay mechanics, really. Like farming and fishing are basic gameplay mechanics for Stardew Valley things. Changing costumes slightly girly. Inherently, I think that is something that highlights that there really isn't that much difference between a girl game and a guy game, to the point that there should be girl games or guy games. There really should just be compelling characters, and if you can write a good character that is a female shepherd versus a good character that's a male shepherd, that's more than likely the best way to do it. It is interesting that the Mario games don't by default always let you play as Princess Peach, because it wouldn't be that hard to reskin Mario and play as Princess Peach instead, saving Mario being kidnapped by Bowser. Which that should be that would be interesting, certainly, if they did that in all future games. It's just like, you know what? You can play as Peach, and at that point, Peach will be rescuing Mario, or you can play as Peach, and then at that point you'd be rescuing like Toadette, because there aren't any other female characters, or Pauline. Pauline would be better, honestly. Or you could play as Luigi, and Luigi would be rescuing Mario, but that would almost imply male on male homosexuality there, and so maybe there should be a new male character, Toad. Yeah, you take all the basic characters there, and you just mix and match it. You can pick any of the Mario characters as a protagonist. They will all just play the same and be different skins. You can pick any of the other characters, and they will be the damsel in distress. So it could be like Yoshi, it could be Luigi, it could be a Koopa Troopa, it could be anybody. And just allow every character to pick their favorite character. It's not like there's any dialogue in Mario games anyways. The last time we were able to select what character you play as was Super Mario Bros. 2 or Doki Doki Panic, and even at that, they played differently. No, New Super Mario U and some of those other games let you play as other characters too, so that's not the last time, but I guess that's the last time in my memory of major games of the series. Yeah. For all the different outfits that Odyssey had, skins of different characters would have made as much sense. Anyways, I'm probably rambling. Risen is coming to the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch on January 24th. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is more than a remaster trailer is available. Screenshots and general FAQ. I kind of want to watch this trailer, just because I want to get a general idea of what this game looks like. Although I have no idea what the original version of this game looks like anyways. The Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII games are, I think, being more integrated into the Final Fantasy VII Remake experience and timelines. So yeah, it looked originally like a PlayStation 2 game, maybe an early PlayStation 3 game, and now it seems like it's a remaster that has just changed all the graphics, but I wouldn't be surprised if it plays exactly the same. And if anything, I would say, from an outsider's perspective, somebody who hasn't played any of Final Fantasy VII, it gets scary, certainly, to potentially want to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake and then just be completely out of the loop because I didn't play Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, or I didn't play the original Final Fantasy VII, or I just haven't played any of the other Final Fantasy games, so there might be some other references or ways of playing those games that I'm not aware of. Like, that there is a real fear of just being completely out of the loop and unable to play those games as a newbie. A deep sea survival simulation game called Surviving the Abyss has been announced for PC, which seems like you are living on the bottom of the sea with buildings. It kind of seems like it's probably a city management game, simulation game. It doesn't look particularly interesting. Wild Hearts: The Power of the Karakuri trailer is available if you want to check that out. If I had more time, I may have looked at that. A hand-drawn narrative adventure game, Last Time I Saw You, is coming to basically everything in the summer of 2024. Hand-drawn animation has not been a way I've described animations because it doesn't really mean anything. Very rarely is it the case that hand-drawn animation is 100% hand-drawn, and it, depending on your art style, just doesn't mean anything. Because I would say, like, looking at this feels almost like a French high art style. The haircut here, the small eyes, the somewhat sharp but not that sharp angles, long arms and legs in a unique kind of bent joint action pose twice here. There is a danger here with the sheerness on this because this is so bright it almost seems like this dress is sheer and that you are literally seeing through her clothes, and maybe you actually are. Then you have like a blue coat here on this boy. And then the background is certainly bright and impactful. Yeah. So I have no idea what companies or what animators are here. That definitely does not look like hand-drawn animation. That looks like that is a CGI effect that you almost certainly would look at. Yeah. Yeah, and I would just lean on thinking that this is closer to something I would describe as just a French high fashion animation. I don't know specifically why I would call it French, but that's what I would lean towards. Or at least Central European animation. But hand-drawn is definitely not something I'd ever call any animation style, because that's too generic. I mean, I could as easily call this hand-drawn, and this looks completely different, and this looks like an 80s cartoon animation style if I was really going to describe it. A roguelike colony simulator, Jumplight Odyssey, has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, due out in early access in 2023. This feels like an 80s cartoon in particular because you have just a lot of solid colors on the outfits, little splashes of colors in specific spots and a little bit of shading, but just not a lot here. Almost certainly the reason something would have been animated like this in a cartoon in the 80s is so that you could have multiple poses of the bodies and then put different heads and different faces and just overlay multiple transparency cells to animate things easily, and that that would inevitably make an 80s cartoon where the bodies are not moving at all, frame to frame, and the head is just opening the mouth and closing the mouth and opening the mouth and closing the mouth, and there's no in-between images. As for what the game actually looks like, it's just 3D CG images. It looks fairly different when you see the characters in this screenshot as just kind of textures over 3D models. Probably asset flipped 3D models. Yeah, I just don't have time today to go through every trailer. Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader gameplay trailer and screenshots are available. This is zoomed out more than I kind of would have expected. Yeah. I really don't expect Warhammer games to be from that top-down perspective where it seems almost like it's a strategy placement game. What are they calling it? An RPG game? I guess that's what it is. Level 0 gameplay trailer is available. I don't recall a game called Level 0. It's a survival horror game. Have I seen this before? This may have been announced just a couple days ago. Bunch of monsters running away from a bunch of monsters. This may be a multiplayer game where you're running away from a bunch of monsters. It seems like this is the kind of game you'd make if you wanted to make an Aliens game and not have to license Aliens, which is not a terrible thought, really. And in a lot of ways, that game visually, seeing the helmet feels a lot like Returnal. Yeah. Which Returnal probably would have been a better game if it was a horror themed trapped in a spaceship game. Moving on, a Viking themed open world survival game called Aska has been announced for PC. It's so weird to be getting announcements like the week before Black Friday, but I guess a lot of these announcements are just games that are either coming out trying to fill in gaps in next year or not coming out anytime soon, and so they just have to be announced for like monetary reasons before the beginning of 2023, so they can say it's coming out in 2023. It's maybe just people wasting their publisher's budget or their publication budget before the end of the fiscal year or end of the actual year. A game called Super Fuse launches in early access on January 31st. It may be more of a case that there is a lot of people that got delayed because of the pandemic, and a lot of people saw that, like every year, there is a high amount of nothing. There's just no games that come out during January and February, mostly because people don't have money they want to spend in January and February. But it seems like some games are going to pull the trigger and say, let's release ourselves in that dead zone at the beginning of the year and see if we really get some sales. A sci-fi action shooter RPG called Cygenus Enterprises has been announced for PC. It'll be due out in early access on December 16th. Arguably, maybe being in early access, some of these games could release in the dead zone of late December, early January, February of the next year. And then the actual release date could be further into the year when people actually would be playing games. It's a very colorful, looks almost like top-down twin-stick shooter dinosaur game with tower defense elements. Definitely seems like it's got a lot going on. Let's see. Here's that same story. Yuji Naka arrested in Dragon Quest tacked inside a trading scandal. It said that he purchased 2.8 million yens aiming shares ahead of the game's announcement. At least in this case, Gematsu does him the justice of not putting in the picture when he has the silly Balin Wonderland hat on. Yep. And see, this is more in line with what you would expect, or what I would expect to see as far as middle management and upper management of Japanese people wearing suits. Even a pinstripe light colored suit is actually a little surprising, and a pink shirt is a little surprising. And the collar being unbuttoned is a little surprising, but yeah. This is much closer to what I expect to see as far as anybody in charge of making games in Japan is to be dressed. Whereas more and more, when I hear new announcements of new companies, they tend to all be in t-shirts and jeans, which is shocking and highlights that things in the business world in Japan seem to be changing fairly quickly. A game called Raiden 3 X Mikado Maniacs has a debut trailer, which it seems like it's anime girls and Raiden shoot 'em up games, and there was like a Naked Fairy character. This wouldn't be the game I would have expected. Would have been not YouTube family friendly. The actual game seems to just be Raiden 3 for the most part. Yeah. The extra content or the extra characters here don't seem to play that big of a role. Company of Heroes 3 was rated for the PS5 and Xbox Series in Taiwan. We already talked about that. Idea Project launches Telnet Revive teaser website featuring the artwork of Genesis shoot 'em up game galleries, which that's a lot of words. Here we have a 80s animation style. This is an actual Mega Drive cartridge, and here you have naked anime girl with long hair and the strategically placed military jet back when anime was actually interested in military jets and robots in general, and they pretty much completely ignored those aspects and those obsessions over the years. Yep. And see, this is the old 80s anime style that is just not really done at all. It's not in any way really going for a bright color palette. It's just like brown on brown on brown. The characters' necks and shoulders are fairly in line with the size of the head. It's not going for that moe style. The arm lengths are realistic. The leg lengths and hip ratios and all that are going for realistic. It's not going for a kawaii, cute, artistic style. You could say this girl is cute, certainly, but it's not bright, super colorful, vomit rainbow color stuff on there. And it's definitely trying to sell more with skin than nudity. And even when you are trying to sell as a game or sell on sex now, most anime that isn't just straight up porn definitely tries to go for more implied lewdness than straight up just showing skin. And they're definitely going more for the titillation when they're trying to sell that way. That being on the cover maybe just highlights how desperate they were to sell Mega Drive games in the day, that you would walk into a Japanese store and see that on the cover is kind of shocking, where nowadays people don't shop that way, so the covers would never really look quite like that. There are still plenty of Japanese games though with characters that have reversible cover art. That may also be a great example of just the censorship that has been put on games like Sega in the past with the Mega Drive covers, probably not restricting too much on as far as what the cover artwork is, whereas Now Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony all have fairly strict limitations on what can be shown on the covers, and that's why you get these reversible covers that show two-piece bikinis, and that's as far as they can go even at that point. So we really have backslid as far as censorship, as far as what the artists might want to display versus what they can display, both in the games and in the box art, which box art matters to some people. It would have definitely mattered in the old days to a lot more people. Moving on, as we try to rush through this, the Dueled Chronicle has a free update launching in March of 2023, and adds a new scenario, weapons, skills, mode, and difficulty. Mode getting no more description other than that. Just a new mode. Dueled Chronicle is apparently a JRPG from Square Enix. Yeah, it's just another example of Square Enix having way too many JRPGs that they're still adding content to and dealing with, and it looks kind of interesting. I'll say that, but I couldn't imagine getting into any Square Enix JRPG at this point. It's just too much of a commitment, too much of an argument over whether I should be playing Final Fantasy or something else. I'd much prefer to play something like Blue Reflection, or even maybe Grand Blue Fantasy here. A Grand Blue Fantasy Festival has been announced for 2022-2023 stage schedule announcement, and Grand Blue Fantasy Relink will be playable. Then this is coming out January 21st. So it's basically an announcement for an announcement on Gametsu.com if you want to check it out. Toho Denmaku Kagura Fantasia Lost adds a Switch version. I think this might be... No, it's a rhythm game. Interesting. Wasn't thinking it was a rhythm game. Yeah. It's straight up as a rhythm game, with maybe some visual novel elements on top of it. And it's going to support English at some point, but none of the screenshots right now are particularly in English. A game called In Nightmare for PC launches November 29th, which I guess is probably not connected to Little Nightmare. It's tagged as an action horror game. And I guess we'll just look at this game when it actually comes out in a week or two, so I'm not going to click on that link. And Crunchyroll announces an 8-bit action-adventure game called Hime's Quest for Game Boy Color and PC browser. The PC browser version due out in December. This is insanity, certainly. That Crunchyroll would try to make video games in the first place, because Crunchyroll barely is even doing a good job at being an anime streaming service. And then totally insane that you would make a game for Game Boy Color, because nobody has a Game Boy Color. Like, legitimately, if you had the physical version of this game, you would have to probably plug it into an analog pocket, which is a little too expensive for most people to buy or have. Or maybe you could... I don't know if the 3DS or new 2DS LL has the connector to put Game Boy cartridges in it. I don't think it probably does at this point for backward compatibility. Like, if the new 2DS or the 3DS still has those connectors, I guess maybe you could make some sense there. When you see companies go completely out of their own scope and do ridiculous things like this, it is almost certainly an example of them being desperate. This trailer looks ridiculous. Yeah, almost certainly this is just a desperate attempt to maintain relevancy. this may be the beginning of the end, and we may hear Crunchyroll is getting shut down in the next year, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly what happens. Generally, the idea of a separate anime streaming service does not make sense. It makes a lot more sense if Hulu stays around for there'd be just more anime on Hulu, or if Netflix stays around, there'll be a lot more anime on Netflix. I don't think Amazon Prime Video cares about adding any new content, so I wouldn't suspect any of it goes that way. I doubt Disney Plus would ever get into the field of anime and compete with their own Disney shows. That would be weird. I wouldn't be surprised if something like Peacock or something else tries to be the place for some anime shows, but that would be weird too. Mostly you'd want to see it all go to Netflix. But on that aspect, I'd also like to see Netflix do a much better job about separating age-appropriate anime versus age-inappropriate anime and cartoons, because I don't feel like they do the best job there. Not even a case where like on the kids' profiles, you shouldn't be seeing age-inappropriate anime. Obviously, that's the first thing they need to get 100% right. But they also need to have this is a G-rated anime that is still not something we would put in the kids' profile, because there really should be a tag. It's like kids' profile, Western cartoons versus anime. Will you let them look at G-rated Western animes like Cardcaptor Sakura, for instance? Or yeah, that's kind of a great example. Or Sailor Moon, which is maybe PG or even PG-13 in Sailor Moon. But yeah, each of those really should be a category as far as just they've already been rated by an age. There are definitely times where I like to watch an anime that is more G-rated versus watching an anime that is more mature rated. And sometimes it's the exact opposite. I want to see a more mature rated one. And arguably Netflix is just not that good at organizing their content anyways. They try, but it's a difficult process to organize such a large collection and such a varied collection. As far as the anime on my shelves, the system I created when I set up the bookshelves, I haven't moved any of the DVDs in over a decade, but was to have different shelves with different themes. So fantasy animes would be on one shelf, whereas sci-fi animes would be on another, whereas horror or psychological deep thinking animes would be on a different shelf. And then what I typically would do is I would put the most kid-friendly on the left of the screen and the least kid-friendly on the right of the screen, based on my general remembering of what was actually in it. But that creates a very non-alphabetical system, certainly, in which things feel like they are completely out of place, but there is actually a system to it. And it also creates a problem like in Tenchi Muyo, whereas the very first Tenchi Muyo series is kind of lewd, and all of them are a little lewd, but then you get into Tenchi Muyo Magical Sailor Sammy, which is way more kid-friendly. But then, in that case, since that's all one series, I tried to put it in chronological release. It also creates similar problems with like Oh My Goddess, spelled O-H, My Goddess, being very lewd, and then the reboot series Oh My Goddess being less lewd, and then Adventures of the Mini Goddess being straight up G-rated, but they're in chronological order. So yeah, there's just so many more exceptions in organizing a collection of videos, then there can be rules. None of that has anything to do with video games though, so let's move on. Broforce Forever update announced. It has new bros and missions. I've forgotten what this game looks like. Yeah. I'm not sure if the phrase bros was ever super popular. Like, these muscle man bro characters, I guess that makes some sense. So, this is a Devolver Digital release game. And interesting that they're putting out a update instead of potentially teasing a sequel, which is probably what they were hoping to do. If anything, I guess that maybe highlights that the update content probably was fairly delayed. So here we have a visual novel, and this too could easily be categorized as hand-drawn animation, which this really highlights. You could call this hand-drawn animation, you could call this hand-drawn animation. Generally, I would just describe this as kind of bad animation. It's inconsistent, certainly, like a very different looking character there versus very low effort looking characters here. And yeah, I don't know if I'd really describe this as anything else than just bad. A bad Western flat realistic art style maybe is what you're going for. Although I really wouldn't even call it realistic. You look how skinny these arms are with no elbow joints. And then, yeah. Yep. In a lot of ways, I guess, even if I could create a perfect system to describe a lot of the animation styles, I would have no idea of how you describe something like this that doesn't have people in it. Like, I haven't even begun to try to think about describing different ways non-human things would be drawn. Generally, there's always going to be exceptions, and in those exceptions, I'm going to give this one a chance. It's probably best to just not say anything. Give that one a chance. Generally, I'm going to just try and run through this. An electrical safety VR video that's animated terribly. Well, as much as I like electrical safety, doing it in VR is really dumb, I think, because you should just be practicing on non-energized components and getting the physical feel. Plus, there's really a focus here on using some components that you'd only really use in high voltage electricity. This, I think, is probably a pull rod, a yank rod for high 10,000 volt transformers, not something that your residential electrical worker would really work with. These panels don't look like they are for residential electrical workers either. So yeah, it is free to play, I guess, and there's some benefit to that at least, whereas very often we see these educational VR things being way expensive. But yeah, you really need the physical experience and the comfort, arguably maybe even working with like low voltage so you actually do get shocked but not killed, like running like 9 volts at a very low amperage through something that would have 10,000 volts in it, usually, just so you get a little bit of a buzz when you touch something. A little bit of a shock wouldn't be the worst thought ever, because there is a high danger there, certainly, of bumping into an exposed wire and getting shocked and not realizing that you would have been shocked and killed if you're working with completely uncharged components, or if you're doing it in VR, just bumping into something. So we have our first adult game here, in Flowers of Satsuni, Sunai, Satsunai, and immediately the screenshots are pornographic. It looks like it's a collection of probably asset flipped ninja girls in a lot of the screenshots with some visual novel aspects. And then in the nude sections, it feels a little bit more differently animated. It's a very soft, pale white skin tones, and a lot of shadowing and shading. Like, there probably is a famous artist known for drawing people in that way, but I couldn't name it. But yeah, it definitely feels very soft brush strokes in the art style. And then I would call it a flat, realistic art style. It's definitely not an anime art style, even though it is Ninja Girls. It is selling for $10.79, and it is English only. So I would interestingly still call it a Western game if I was going to continue down that category of describing things. It's a Western game, just telling, even it says it's an artistic Japanese inspired world of adventure. And I'm not deep enough in my own education as far as the way Japanese, like Sanskrit paper paintings are. It may be somewhat inspired by that, like pre-anime Japanese art from 100, 200, 300 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if it is somewhat inspired by that, some of those drawings. Let's see. Here we have something just called Showball. Tiger Life. Wow. This one looks all over the place. This is a weird looking game, but it also looks like a mobile game. So I think since I am curating the YouTube shorts, I'm going to give this a follow, but I'm not going to make a YouTube short on it. Alright, and then immediately we have Talent Club Match 3 Puzzle, which is a anime girls in lewd costumes. Although, in all fairness, there's nothing really YouTube family unfriendly here. It's just anime girls. And this is definitely going with the flat, unrealistic art style, giant heads, very small necks, very small shoulders, breast size that are maybe a little too big for the waist size and the hip size, or just in general. This may be another game that really doesn't have any adult content on it and is just selling like it does, just trying to be lewd. It says it has full Japanese audio, English and Chinese otherwise. Looks like there's 3 different characters. Slightly revealing clothing. So there is this odd split here between lewd games that won't cross a line and feel like they either were censored in development or they were censored before release, and then actual full nudity adult games on Steam. And there may be statistically too close to call, really, but there may be a small pattern of flat, unrealistic art styles, anime art styles in particular, Japanese anime games, being more censored or not being allowed on Steam, whereas the realistic art styles and realistic proportions being allowed at a fairly high rate. Again, we have another adult game, so there's definitely some bundling going on. I'm not even sure I believe now that it is happening every 2 weeks. It seems like it's being more consistent every 1 week. So this game is Sexy Mystic Survivors, which literally has just that one adult screenshot, and then the rest of the screenshots are of a top-down game. It's an early access, which maybe adult games should be allowed to be in early access. It's $8.99. Supports a bunch of languages, Japanese full audio. Interestingly, the mature content warning is actually fairly low down the page because of a bunch of other links to a bunch of other games that they're promoting. Let's see. Interesting. One of the warnings here is unwanted sex, which is a funny way to say rape, certainly. Or unconsensual sex. The actual game, though, looks pretty terrible as a top-down twin-stick shooter game. It has RPG as a tag, but I'm not sure there really is a lot of that. And so now we have seen one realistic Western adult game released on Steam. We've seen one anime style adult game released on Steam, and we've seen one that was censored, or feels like it was probably censored, Chinese style lewd game, all in a row. So, and all of this is happening late in the evening on Friday again, where very few people are going to see it. Dead on Arrival remastered. I guess the question is, was there a Dead on Arrival originally? I guess that's where we would do the research. Yeah. This game is free, so I guess check it out now if you're interested. But it's also in early access, and also I don't think it really deserves a YouTube short. So we'll leave it at that. Is this yet another adult game? No, I don't think so. It's just that this dress is a little too close to a skin tone. More than likely this is an asset flip character to be in an RPG game. The color palette here is just way too blown out. Just everything is way too bright. And for that reason alone, I'm gonna say no to it. There's just no real quality control there. Same thing could be said for a lot of games like this. This next one, Love Hentai and Puzzles, Dungeon Boobs. Like, the jigsaw puzzles aren't really showing the final puzzles in any of the screenshots, so I'm having kind of a hard time figuring out what the images are. It seems like a lot of these images are not showing nipples, but they're just showing a lot of cleavage and really big boobs in the trailer. It's $2.99. It's English, Portuguese, Brazil. And the mature content says during all the gameplay, complete nudity is presented, which is an odd way to phrase that, certainly, instead of saying the game contains nudity. And it is just a jigsaw puzzle game. Which at a certain level, for all the lewd jigsaw puzzle games that get put on Steam, I could see Steam and Valve just encouraging people to just say, look, these jigsaw puzzle games are only selling for this one reason. Why don't you just put the full nudity in there? Although it's probably harder to steal or find images or that have full nudity. But why not just go the full Monty and show the full nudity and sell it in the adult section? If Valve cared about the adult section of their storefront and pushed more developers to put their games on their storefront and promoted more games in the adult section, then there could be a pretty good shifting of garbage games not showing up in front of the eyes of people who are just not interested in garbage games, getting rid of the mushy middle games in a lot of ways too, and that potentially would help. The next game is Love Hentai and Puzzles Occultist Girls, and in this case, instead of anime girls in lewd poses, it's more flat to the realistic Western art styles of girls that are kind of goth-like, kind of occultists. Although, what occultist actually means is fairly weird. There's just like a girl with black hair, and I guess she's a cultist, and there's a girl with red hair, that I don't know why that'd be an occultist. There's a African American girl in a leopard print, which that too doesn't really seem occultist. It seems like the theme is very loose. I guess maybe she's supposed to be doing voodoo in the African American girl, and maybe the black hair is supposed to be doing some kind of Asian summoning, but I can't really tell. And yeah, this is just the same publisher for $2.99. English, Portuguese, Brazil also heavily implies there's not a lot of effort being put into this. The next game is Love Hentai and Puzzles Cattle and Horses, and this is just straight up furries. So they are just trying to sell the same images, very possibly stolen, or no, different images for each game, that although I suspect very possibly stolen. And then the main game is just puzzle games, and they're flooding the market. They're all $2.99. They all support English and Portuguese Brazil. And certainly that's not a case where I could claim that there's some form of bundling going on from Valve's perspective. If somebody is going to try and flood Steam with 3 extremely similar games releasing at the same day, Valve can do very little, but there is one thing they certainly could do, which is to stop people who are in the Steam Direct program from publishing any game more than once per month. So Steam Direct says you can publish 1 game per month at maximum, so you got to make it list, and then you'd have developers slowly over the course of 3 months publishing 3 very similar games, and most people wouldn't even notice that if that was the case. This may be the same game being published twice again. There may be a level here. Yeah, this is just like 4 versions, I bet, for each season of Soku Bear, which is supposed to be a box-pushing Sokoban game, but it doesn't look that good. There might be some bundling on Valve's part of just garbage games when people are trying to submit 4 games at the same time. And see, it makes no sense at all that you would put out 4 different seasons of the same game at the same time. Why not spread that out between each season? Put out the winter version of the game now, and then put out the spring version when spring happens. Third, it looks like another VR game that I think I'll give it a chance, but I'm not going to really be promoting VR games with YouTube Shorts. The Pure Arcade seems to be a collection of kind of ugly arcade games. I've seen better versions of that kind of game idea. Spider-Man Miles Morales is available and very positive. It was already on my wish list. Somebody on Reddit said they were giving this away as a contest. Honestly, though, when you see random people giving away things on Reddit, I think that's probably more for content farming, and very possibly they aren't giving away anything, or your odds are going to be very low. Certainly, if I was going to make a new competitor to Twitter, if I was secretly the person in charge of Twitter, and I was going to try and make an everything app, one of the things I would start from day one would be a system of verifying that contests are legitimate and that the items that are being shipped actually happen and get shipped. And at a certain level, that may straight up be just a random number generator that picks who the winner is, and then an email confirmation within 6 weeks of the device being shipped, the award being shipped, that it actually was received and was what they promised. It's fairly easy to do this. Is this an adult game? Seems almost like it would be. But yeah, there's actually no adult content on this. This is another one where I think I might give it a chance because there might be an interesting puzzle game here, but there might also be nothing. And visually it's just still not interesting enough. Everdyne, A Lost Girl's Tale. Looks like it's a RPG game. That there might be something to it. It doesn't come off quite as an RPG Maker game. But there actually might not be anything to it. But yeah. Digitally you can confirm whether something has been delivered fairly quickly. Just by asking people to like connect their Steam account to this Everything app. Physically you could ask for tracking numbers for when something is shipped, and you could email the person who's supposed to receive it. And if the website themselves is the one determining who won, then that guarantees that you can't give, or at least it makes a lot of progress to the idea that you couldn't give away something to a friend of yours and then work on clout. Although inherently, part of the problem with Reddit is just the fact that there is this clout upvoting system that works somewhat, but doesn't work well enough. This is a prologue game, so I probably wouldn't want to make a YouTube short, but I'll give it a chance. And now we're not seeing any adult games at all. Like we had that whole bundle in a row, and now it's just gone. This is a weird point where this might be an interesting little Resident Evil clone, like indie thing, but you kind of have to say no to it because it just looks so ugly, and it just doesn't really have any relevancy as a new game to look that bad. Alright, so here's another adult game. We have Sex Teacher, which this is realistic CGI models, and every single screenshot is just like a different angle and a different pose. It looks like it may have a little bit of visual novel dialogue, but pretty much it seems like it's probably 5 minutes of just pre-rendered images, if I was to guess. Maybe there is actually some moments. It's $5.09. The warning here says, "Warning!" exclamation point. This game is for adults only and includes explicit sexual content, and some viewers may find offensive. The characters in the games are all over 18 years old. It supports in the interface English and Chinese, but then in subtitles it says it also supports German, Spain, Spanish, and Japanese. Yeah, this is again one of these low effort asset flip 3D CGI adult things. There's one girl in it and one guy, and that seems to be it looking at the screenshots. So I'm not really offering a lot. Like 20 minutes for $5, which is what I guess I am just guessing is the amount of content, and it just doesn't really work. $5 even for like 5 hours, if it is just all going to be the action, arguably doesn't work that well. I'd like to see those kinds of games get a lot better or go away. Although it'd be fairly hard to censor pure adult games out of an adult storefront. And I'm sure there is an audience there that does just not really want to play, and they just like CG art and they like to actually own it and not have to download it from some other website where it might get taken down or go away. Let's see. Next we have a game called Bingus My Beloved, which I guess is a furry visual novel game. Although I don't know if you really even would call this a furry game so much as you're actually playing as cats more than anthropomorphic cats. It's dangerously close to being better described as a animal on animal romance game, which dangerously gets close to a bestiality video game. Let's see, next we have a game called Tales of Therapy that looks just like an RPG maker, nothing there. And then we have what looks like a Marvel Madness clone. It doesn't look terrible. Hey, we just had somebody called Nichigo X say hey yo on the chat. I'll say hello back. Probably are 10-20 minutes away from being done. Here we have Hoshizora no Memoria Eternal Heart HD from Sekai Project, which looks like it's moe anime girls in a visual novel. Let's see. $17.99, Japanese and English. Apparently there's a prequel, so this is a sequel to Hoshizora no Memoria Wishing Upon a Shooting Star. Let's see. Contains mild violence and profanity. User discretion advised. Nichigo says, what's up? Nothing much really. I'm just going through the games that came out on Steam since Wednesday. Divinity looks like it's probably a little too weird. That being said, I will say the kind of cardboard cutout art style at some point might work, but I don't know if it really works in a game. It kind of more works in a South Park episode or something like that. Let's see, Slav or Not is probably a troll joke game. Target React Force looks like an asset flip garbage game. Mikaria Archived does not look good. Witchpunk from Digipen, so this may be a student project. Yep, this is a free student project that probably doesn't go that long. It's tagged as a beat 'em up game. See if we can get a general idea of how it plays. It's kind of a skating slash beat 'em up game where you're playing as a witch. I'll put this on the wish list, and I guess in this case I'll probably do a YouTube short. Student projects in general or something I would like to highlight, and making YouTube shorts around that is probably a great idea. This game was developed as a student project at Digipen Institute of Technology and was created for educational purposes only. Please check out the publisher page for more information, which having to go to the publisher page is ridiculous. Part of the problem that gets highlighted by this is Digipen has put out several games on you can just click on it and get to it. They put out several games on Steam, and the more games they put out on Steam, the more they highlight how their students are not really going anywhere. Like, their students do make some decent games. I'm not going to complain about that. The quality is very good for a student project, and it's all worth looking at. But the last time I heard anybody getting hired from Digipen and entering the game industry was when the team that made Portal 1 got hired by Valve. And almost certainly there are some some people that are getting hired by other companies, but they're just like entry-level employees, and then they have to spend the next 5 to 10 years being entry-level, low-level programmers. They are not rock stars out of college forming their own companies or making independent games. Notably, I think DigiPen in particular is designed, like most colleges, to have you work for a corporation. It's not designed for you to go and be independent. And if you really want to make your name as a programmer, you probably are better off not going to DigiPen, maybe not even going to college at all, teaching yourself to program and getting together with some other animators and game developer elements, like sound designers and things like that, working together as a team to make an indie game and sell it. Or honestly, you're probably best off doing both. Going to a college, maybe not a specialized college for video game, but just a general computer science C++ degree, learning that and being able to work in the programming industry, whether on video games or otherwise, and then having a group of friends in that college work together to make an independent game and actually sell it. Noticeably, DigiPen does not let any of these people sell their games, because I'm sure DigiPen technically owns the rights to all your creations while you're in college, which is not uncommon for colleges and is a huge, ridiculous ripoff. But yeah, DigiPen was a college I was planning on going to when I wanted to be a video game programmer, and I just didn't get the scheduling and funding set up, and so I never went. And I'm fairly glad I didn't go, but had I gone, I very possibly would have been on the team of people who did work on Portal 1 and may have been hired by Valve. There is an alternate universe where it's very believable that I would have been an employee at Valve right now, doing basically nothing at Valve, like most of the people at Valve. But I do want to highlight students' projects, certainly. Try and support the next generation. Here we have a breadboard simulator app. I find this intriguing, so I'm going to say yes to this. But certainly if you're not into electronics, if you haven't been trained into electronics or makerspace, doing this doesn't make the most amount of sense. Depending on the number of circuits and chips that you can get and how many of those are actually pinned out to be usable in a dual inline package dip pin format, will drastically change like how useful something like this is. And it is worth pointing out that most of this is completely useless technology now. You just don't build circuits this way, you don't test out circuits this way, you don't use chips that look like that. It's all surface mounted, it's all tiny microcontrollers. Anything you would potentially do outside of educational purposes, you would do with something like an ESP32 S2 or S3 or an Arduino microcontroller, something like that. And you're just not going to build circuits this way. Real people building real circuits are going to be building thousands of transistors, millions of transistors, large things. They're not going to do it in a breadboard. They're going to have it in a software. A lot of the softwares that are making CPUs and GPUs are doing it using artificial intelligence, and so the layouts and things like that are just automated as far as tracing the circuits. And really, there's probably less than a dozen people that actually need to work at that high level or that low level to make CPUs and GPU circuitry, working at like Intel or AMD. So yeah, this is something that would be good for educational purposes, but potentially it's only going to save you, it may save you like $100 to $200 if you bought all these components in the real world and tried them in the real world. The power supply is going to be your most expensive thing there if you have a variable power supply like what is being shown here. Whereas each of these components is just going to be $1 at most. And so if you are doing educational practice, doing it in the real world is probably as good as paying $10 to do it in a simulated world. Moving on, we have a game called UFO No, which looks like nothing. Cthulhu Book of the Ancients Prologue looks like it might be something, so we'll give that a thought. We're running into the problem of a lot of things being labeled prologues again, and the idea of a prologue being a demo versus the idea of a prologue being a actual prologue and its own content. Can I reject Spy Robot Gateway to Humanity? I'll give it a chance. And that should be all the games that came out on Steam. So let's go through GameDeveloper.com articles and then a fault list cleanup, and then we'll be done. Apparently, Cooking Mama Cookstar is going to be delisted following arbitration ruling. Planet Entertainment and Office credits legal battle for Cooking Mama Cookstar release has come to an end. This is from GameDeveloper.com. So Planet Entertainment lost its 2-year legal battle with Office Create, holders of the Cooking Mama license. The loss concludes the complicated saga of Cooking Mama Cookstar, which was shortly removed from stores after Planet released the title in 2022 on Nintendo Switch. Shortly after the game was pulled off the shelves, Office Create killed its contract with Planet Entertainment and threatened legal action against the publisher. Despite that, Planet continued to sell physical and digital copies of Cooking Mama Cookstar later on the Switch and later on the PlayStation 4 in 2021. So they really were fighting here over whether or not this game could be sold. Now, I think Cooking Mama Cookstar is actually a pretty awful game, and that's part of the problem there. Generally, in these cases, you would almost always blame the publisher and side with the developer, although in this case, I think it really was the developer that was at fault. They just made a bad game and didn't meet the requirements to really allow it to be sold, and then tried to sell it anyways. And perhaps there was just a bad faith negotiation, or a miscommunication as to who owned the rights and who could sell things. But yeah, the last time we had a major ruling where a game had to be completely delisted probably is still Too Human, which was many years ago. And getting a copy of Too Human sealed in box this day is still pretty easy. So if you had a sealed in box version of Cooking Mama Cookstar, maybe it would have some collectability to it. So don't open it, obviously, but probably not that much collectability. The truth is, video games are just made in such high numbers that these games are around no matter what. Almost certainly somebody has ripped and stolen the ROMs for Cooking Mama Cookstar if you wanted to play the game. And that would be the solution for the vast majority of people. Inherently, this is kind of a case where society would be better served if there is this kind of fight where the arbitration, well, honestly, it shouldn't be arbitration. It should be actually in a court system. If it goes to a court battle, one of the options that the judge should be able to do is to say, this game is now public domain. Anybody can make a copy and download ROMs for it, and nobody can profit from it at all. Because inherently, this game is now being held ransom from anybody who wants to play it. because of legal wrangling and fights that they were not involved with. And nothing gets in public domain unless it just is around for many, many years past the point of it even being relevant. Whereas way more things should be allowed to be put in public domain. Same case with bankruptcy. When a company goes bankrupt, all their intellectual property should be made public domain at that point, and anybody can make any game around it whatsoever. Instead, bankruptcy law just allows some other patent troll to potentially buy the IP of a company and then sell it some more, even though there's absolutely nobody creative involved in that new company who bought the IP, and they had no creative input, and they aren't benefiting society at all by selling the product. Yeah. But I'm getting off topic, so we'll move forward. See, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxies reached 8 million players a year later, which I still never figured out what this game really was as a game. I plan on playing it at some point, but I am going to go in pretty blind. This is also another, I guess, example of the human actors really not looking like the Marvel movie characters that much. And yeah, that's not Dave Bautista. There needs to be really, and I said this on Wednesday, just a consistent way in which in the comics and the video games all of these characters are drawn. That way Star-Lord, for instance, here looks like Star-Lord in all of the games and comics, instead of just looking like a generic guy with blonde hair. We already talked about this a couple times. Square Enix employees arrested for alleged insider trading. GameDeveloper.com has that article too. Then report that the Sonic co-creator, which I guess he's technically the Sonic co-creator, was also arrested. Which that is certainly another thing you don't want reported on when your Sonic Frontiers is coming out. I haven't heard enough reviews on Sonic Frontiers. Some of these games I do need to straight up go to like Metacritic and just look at the user reviews on them a week later. That's something I could do like every stream, is just look at the new games and look at their reviews. Let's see, Activision Blizzard has tweaked its SMS Protect to support prepaid phone plans, which is nice, certainly. This has already been disputed as completely untrue, but Google allegedly paid Activision Blizzard and Riot to not create mobile app stores. Maybe it was true for Riot, but Activision Blizzard has already come out and said that it is just completely false. They're not even beating around the bush. Let's see, a game called Immortality launches on mobile via a Netflix partnership. There's this trivia game on Netflix that looks like it might be slightly interesting. They've tried to do trivia games a couple times, and the problem is that the players, like my Roku TV, are just not really fast enough for those kinds of games, and you're pointing the remote at the TV, so if you're holding the remote slightly at an angle, you don't get the input in fast enough. X-Wargaming and Valve developers form Eschatology? I don't know how you pronounce that. Eschatology Entertainment and raised $4 million in funding. The debut game from Eschatology Entertainment appears to share similarities with a project from the co-founder's previous studio. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some Valve employees leave Valve. Like, if Valve starts to focus more on the Steam Deck and hardware, and, well, in a weird way, I would suspect more people will leave Valve if Valve starts to make the employees actually do work, then I would say employees at Valve are leaving because Valve is making games again with Half-Life Alyx, or doing things with the Steam Deck. But also I could just see a lot of people got rich working at Valve, or well kept working at Valve, and now they want to go and do something different. Alright, and so we have some fall list cleanup here. A toad well traveled. I think this can leave the fall list. I'm not really sure why this would have been on the fall list in the first place. There definitely are some weeks where I'm just not interested in making decisions. This is overwhelmingly positive as a free game, so I'll put it in there. It doesn't have any in-app purchases. Put that on the wish list. We went all the way around as far as games on the fall list. So we're starting with games that start with A. Clearly one of the games has been completely removed from the storefront. That's what happens when that happens. So yeah, inevitably I will have a long fall list of games that have all just been removed from the storefront. I'll have to do something about that. This one barely has relevancy with 30 reviews, but they are positive, so I'll put that on the wish list. These are all old games, though, or at least relatively old. This probably is a hidden object game, but it seems like it's got enough going for it that I would make an exception. Normally I would say no to hidden object games, but this does kind of look fairly kid-friendly. Although, honestly, I'm not even really looking for kid-friendly games at this point. Anybody that... this is a horror RPG maker, which I could either give it more time or just remove it. And I think I probably want to just remove it because it's not that... it's just not that well drawn. Yeah, I still have some nephews and nieces who maybe would want to play kids games, but by the time they're potentially having either a Steam Deck or a laptop or a PC or anything that could get into Steam games, I think that they would be too old for most kids games. The Lego games, maybe. This is a narrative based on Red Ribbon's new album Planet X. I have no idea who Red Ribbon is. A visual novel based on a soundtrack is interesting, but it would have to be somebody pretty big. And it's a little surprising that we don't see these kinds of gimmicks as far as musicians these days. Regardless, this was in June 11th of 2021 and it has no relevancy, so it's just nobody really reviewing it, not enough reviews. So that'll leave the fall list. This is another horror game that more than likely, this one's a VR game. Yeah, when I get back to, oh, this is not even available on the Steam store, so we'll take it off. When I get back to the Z's, I'm gonna really start to make hard choices on VR games and probably just start removing VR games. This kind of sucks because this looks like it might have been a little interesting as a VR game, and it's already been just removed. Maybe they're gonna try and do more of a better release later, or maybe you'll just never see it again. This one is rated very positively, but it's a VR game, so I'm gonna leave it because I'm not putting VR games in the fall list. This one says a VR game. Yeah. It's rated positively, but not by very many reviews. I'm just gonna go ahead and take that off early. I couldn't imagine that something's gonna happen over the course of 2023 that would convince me This one's not relevant either, no reviews. To embrace VR and play old VR games. Like, that. The only thing possibly is if somehow the Steam Deck pivoted into VR headsets and all of a sudden VR headsets made a lot more sense. Which, honestly, I think the VR controllers just wouldn't be worse than the Steam Deck controller if you were wearing a VR headset. You still would need VR controllers. So I don't know how the Steam Deck could really power a VR headset unless it just docked to some dock and powered a headset that way, which is possible. Alright. So we've got the Duel Live video playing here as I scroll through my Twitter feed. There's a new shift code for Wonderlands. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. They're just calling it Wonderlands. And I'm scrolling down my Twitter feed to see if there's any other new news worth mentioning. Suppose next week, particularly on Friday, will be next Black Friday. I probably won't stream for very long, and I'll be looking at sales. Of course, you have Black Friday, and then I guess there's still a thought of Cyber Monday, although not so much. Like, people really not talking about Cyber Monday anymore. But yeah, that is a weekend I imagine I won't be doing too much. Yeah. Bythel Games is getting into the publishing business, is maybe the only article here. I did start late this evening anyway, so it's not super surprising that there really wouldn't be it. I could also see myself playing more Yu-Gi-Oh! We've got this whole festival going on. It wouldn't be a terrible thought to try to play more and grind off screen. Start very early since the festival just started with the extra grinding instead of being desperate at the end and having to grind a lot more at that point. And I'm still just scrolling down my Twitter feed, which probably isn't going to show me anything. I did see a comment on Reddit that there's just a lot of lackluster elements to the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And a lot of them are kind of just almost meme-worthy, opinion-based complaints about it. But the one that stood out to me in particular is it doesn't really feel like Scarlet and Violet have that very, very interesting gym leaders or characters in general. They very possibly are just so focused on making an open world game and kind of changing things that they didn't really bother to write much of a story. Cyan, the creators of Myst, that company, has announced on Twitter that they've started and joined a Mastodon server, which is, Mastodon is weird and complicated, and I don't think people are going to jump over to that. If people all do jump over to Mastodon's instances, because there is no one website that controls Mastodon servers, then you're almost certainly going to have these smaller communities of insular communities of game developers talking to each other and not talking to the public, which that's the one thing Twitter still was good at, was being a place where big businesses could talk to the public, where you could follow big businesses and hear what they're saying. And Mastodon, I just don't think really addresses that. Twitter, I suspect, I mean, it's a little shocking even now that there isn't a competitor to Twitter that's already launched, and that is announcing itself, at least, as we're going to be a Twitter competitor and jump over to this. Like, you could have had a site that existed for years and nobody used and bring them back. It's surprising even Facebook isn't saying, hey, come home to Facebook. We've got this new feature it looks like Twitter, it feels like Twitter. Now, this is an article that I don't know if it's fair to really blame Horizon Zero Dawn for this as much as Video Games Chronicle, pointing out that you can buy a PS5 DualSense controller and a copy of Horizon Forbidden West for £45 in the UK. They chose here to use the LGBTQ plus with transgendered colors on her face, which anytime you show Aloy's face in Forbidden West, it still runs into that problem of her face looking just really bloated and fatter than you're used to seeing, fatter than the way she looked in the first game. But yeah, this picture basically having nothing to do with the cell. Of course, at a certain point, I guess you can blame Horizon Forbidden West for creating this picture in the first place, but their virtue signaling was at least within the realm of the time where it was pro-LGBTQ plus virtue signaling on Twitter. Arguably, if I was going to make a competitor to Twitter, I probably wouldn't let people change their logos and virtue signal like that. Anyways, it's so much better to tell people, be a little totalitarian and say, no, you can't change your logo, you can't change your name, we're going to keep it consistent for security reasons, and stop people from virtue signaling. That's not stopping people from talking, and they certainly could put pictures and comments of support, but when you're just doing a black icon on your logo, or just changing your logo to a flag, that your speech there is not worth a lot, because you're not actually saying anything in words or anything different or new. So yeah, I'd probably try to put some constraints on that and just help nudge people against stupid activities towards better activities. In the opposite way, I'd probably allow people to promote giving away to charities. That's something Facebook added very late in its lifestyle that was actually very useful. Alright, well, anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.